So, hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here in the Yongamula / Pilikutu forest, and thought to record a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. So I thought that could start with just a little meditation, so I can lean forward a little bit and arch the spine, and look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in and know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And when focusing in on the breath at the tip of the nose, can be good to make mindfulness as continuous as possible. Being aware all the way through the in-breath. As the in-breath turns to the out-breath, all the way through the out-breath, and as the out-breath turns back to the in-breath again. Trying to keep mindfulness as continuous as possible. And can just pose the question in the mind. What would be a really comfortable way to breathe right now? And one can just let one's body respond on its own. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And you can open our eyes and do a short Dhamma discussion for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So I hope that everybody's keeping well, wherever it might be. And was discussing with somebody, and an interesting question came up. It was kind of, how does one, paraphrasing and generalizing the question, we were basically discussing a little bit about past traumas, and how does one deal with past traumas? How does one process past traumas? So one of the things about past traumatic events is that those events are things that have happened to one in one's life that are extremely negative. And there's negative reactions that one has to that event, which sometimes one reviews the event in one's mind and thinks, I should have reacted that way. And one, from that point forward, tends to knee-jerk react in that way. Or just subconsciously, if the event was quite negative, then one's perceptions towards things can be warped. If one was walking down a dark alley and got mugged, then of course dark alleys are good things to be careful of, but it can be the case that every single time one sees an alley, one will start to feel fear, or one will want to avoid taking shortcuts for fear of being mugged. These kind of things can happen. So past traumatic events, there's a reason why our body and our minds react this way. It's because if something very traumatic, very negative has happened to us, then in general, one wants to be careful not to have that same thing happen again. So the physical aspects that come with it is kind of like flight and fight responses, and extreme caution not to have that event happen again. To a certain extent, they're reasonable. But then there's a certain extent to which they're unreasonable. So almost everything in the Dhamma, almost everything in our Buddhist practice, it has elements of it that require balance. So another way to look at it is it's almost like a paradox. Sometimes one has to do two things at once that seem like they're opposite poles. So in the case of a traumatic event, yes, it's good to be careful of those future events, of not having that event repeat itself in the future. But it's not good to have actions and reactions that were appropriate to a long past event coming up at times when they're inappropriate and influencing one's behaviors in ways that are inappropriate. So the difficult thing about past traumatic events is that these things they can operate on a very visceral level. They can operate on a very physical level in one's body. They can have effects in one's body. And it's kind of involuntarily, one will experience unpleasant physical symptoms. And those can lead to unpleasant mental thoughts, and they can exacerbate the unpleasant physical symptoms. And they kind of have this vicious cycle effect. So one of the best ways, or a good way to look at past traumas, is like somebody yelling on the street. And it's kind of in one way, in one sense, it's good to look at them like somebody yelling on the street. So in Canada, when one walks down the street in busy cities, sometimes there's people who want attention. Sometimes they're the big billboards on they wear some of them wear sandwich boards with whatever it is they're trying to get attention about, and they stand at the side of the street and they kind of yell sometimes. And they want attention. They want people to go and talk to them. So if one goes and talks to that person, one is entering into that person's world. What they want, they have this, sometimes they have ideas that some may say are not so in line with reality, and they want people to enter into that reality with them. They want people to join them in that reality and to see what they see as important. So if one goes and talks to them and engages with them, then what happens is one is entering into their reality to a certain extent. It won't make them go away. It won't make them stop yelling. It won't make them stop talking. To a certain extent as well, if one tries to chase them away, they may also come back. In Canada, you can't, people are free. You can't just go up and, threaten to throw rocks at people or something. You could maybe yell at them or something, and they'll still want to stay for that. It may even fire them up even more. Maybe after a brief silence or a brief surprise, well, these guys are, they don't understand what I'm trying to say, and they'll continue on with their rant. So the appropriate thing to do in this case is, if one knows what important business one has to do during that day, then no matter who it is that's yelling on the street, one doesn't really pay attention to them. I mean, one pays attention at first. What are they saying? Are they saying there's a fire? Are they saying that, watch out, there's been a warning that the nuclear power plant's going to explode and it's real? It's a real warning? Are these things that we should pay attention to? Are these things that are real? So that's the first thing. Are they saying something legitimate? Not everybody who yells on the street is just yelling nonsense. Some people may yell on the street for legitimate emergencies. But if after listening for a moment or two, we realize that what they're trying to do is suck us into their world, and it's going to be a negative thing, we realize we've got things to do that day. And so rather than stopping and engaging with the person, rather than yelling at them, we continue on with whatever it is that's important to do. And when one goes in cities enough, major cities enough, in North America at least, can't speak for other places much, I haven't spent much time in major cities and other places, then one just gets used to this phenomenon. And to a certain extent, one doesn't pay attention to it. Just seeing another person on the street, or a person on the street ranting or wanting attention, then one doesn't necessarily, it's just normal. It becomes normal, and one doesn't engage with them. And moments after noticing it, it's out of one's mind. So this can be taken as like a metaphor for how to deal with traumatic events. In a sense, there can be legitimate warnings to traumatic events. This is like the person who's saying, watch out, there's an emergency. If we hear somebody like that, we should pay attention and investigate it further to see if we should take appropriate actions. But most of the time, the reason why traumatic events are what we call traumatic, they're things that cause negative emotions in the present and have a negative impact on one's life overall, is because they're these things that come into our head and cause inappropriate responses in the present moment. Sometimes they're things that cause excessive fear. Sometimes they're things that cause us to react in ways that were appropriate in the past, but not in the present. And a lot of this comes from this voice, this inner voice that's in one's head, playing back whatever the traumatic event was, rehashing it, and saying, I would do this, or I would do that. If this kind of thing happens again, I'll do this. Or it may play the event and say, this is going to happen right here. There's a danger of this happening here, even though one knows this is really irrational. So if one were to just try to repress that event out of one's mind, totally squash it out of existence, sometimes this is an appropriate reaction. If the mental sound of the event is so loud that it's going to cause one to do something really bad in the present moment, one should squash it out so as not to do the bad thing. But this is a bit like yelling at the crazy person. In a sense, in grabbing it and throttling it and squashing it out, one is actually entering into that person's world to a certain extent. One is entering into their way of being, their way of living, and it can cause it to come back stronger. There's a certain fear that's attached to this crushing out, and that fear is a link to the emotion. So as long as there's this link, what we're doing is we're actually habituating the mind to make that come up again. So one of the important things to understand about the way that the mind works in general is that it works on the process of habituation. It works on a process of, if one does something or practices something, one gets better at it. So it doesn't so much work on a process of like having a certain levels to the mind, like there's this level of anger and this level of fear or whatever, and as long as we get it out of our system by expressing it, then it will go away. What actually happens is when we indulge in whatever the negative emotion is that's associated with this past event, we're training the mind to react that way more. We're training the mind to think of this past event more and to react negatively more. So the right thing to do, the actual approach to make these things come to an end, is basically not to pay any attention to them and to continue on with whatever skillful behavior it is that one knows one could be doing, should be doing. One doesn't listen to the crazy person, one goes shopping, goes to run whatever errand one was running so that the crazy person doesn't interfere with the quality of one's day. So saying this is one thing, doing it is another thing, because oftentimes these very negative emotions have such a strong impact that one wants to cover them up with distraction, or one wants to react to them in such a way that it's almost like one is repaying the past. But none of these things are going to be appropriate strategies that will actually bring that negative emotion to an end. So the thing to do is actually to note whatever it is that's skillful to do in that moment. Actually, this is not usually all that difficult. One knows, okay, it's not skillful for me to lash out and rage at this moment. Okay, this is 12 noon. It's a normal looking alleyway. You know, there's kids playing in the alleyway. There's no muggers here. I can go walk down this alleyway. You know, this is a skillful thing to do. But the difficult thing about it is that although one knows this intellectually, there's going to be these body responses. There's going to be these memories. There's going to be these emotions that come up that make one want to act in the way that one has been habituated to, make one want to act in line with this traumatic event, to act it out again, to make it stronger, to keep it in mind. So it's in resisting this traumatic event, in not doing what it asks us to do, in enduring the painful feelings that come with it, this is actually how that event is brought to an end. It's how this event comes to an end, because it's not being habituated in the mind anymore. It's not being fed. And we feed this thing with attending to it with fear. We feed this thing with attending to it with anxiety or worry or anger or reacting out of it. This is how these past traumatic events get fed, and they actually become something in the present. So the simplest thing to do when the crazy person yells is to continue with one's business. And eventually they go away. What they want is an audience. They want to draw somebody into their world. And if you're not going to take part in their world, then they'll go find somebody else. So meditation can help quite a lot with this. If we have a regular meditation practice, meditating in the morning, meditating in the evening, meditating during the day, what we're actually doing is to train our mind, despite whatever external distractions there are, to stay with one object. We're training our mind to do what we say to do, to attend to what we say to attend to. And this makes it a whole lot easier when the crazy person is yelling, just to continue on with one's business. But if one continues on with one's business, one can have a much better day. Okay, so those are some few reflections, and wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.